got a smile on my face. For a good few months now, I've been going through the Thirlwall inquiry and trying to paint a picture, picking out certain examples, but I needn't have bothered because the professionals have come in and done it for us. This is a closing statement for the management: Ian Harvey, Alison Kelly, Tony Chambers and Sue Hodkinson, and this is written by one of the lawyers, Kate Blackwell KC, and it's dated March 2025. I didn't pick it up before because it was in like a separate section on the Thirlwall inquiry, and actually the whole thing is a breath of fresh air, and I'm actually just going to read the lot. I'll obviously put a link into it, but I'm just going to read the whole thing, crime scene to courtroom style, I think, because it's so good. I'm going to start from I'm going to start at 29, I think, just because the first bit is about accepting. They should have done, perhaps they could have done this a bit better and that a bit better. Okay. So strap in. Obviously, if you don't like my voice and I do read a bit slowly, you can just read it yourself. But I implore anyone to read it. It's brilliant. It's basically like it's like the defence's closing statement. However, this is incorporating everything from the Thirlwall inquiry, so it's post trial, and it's even post Shuley conference. In January 2025, towards the end of the public hearings, counsel to the inquiry produced a document titled Countess of Chester: Evidence about the number of deaths on the neonatal unit pre-2015. This demonstrates that Dr. Breary, Arian Powell and Ruth Millward each performed the task of calculating the number of deaths on the NNU between 2010 and 2014, and their number didn't always tally. In his evidence to the inquiry, Professor David Spiegelhalter described the neonatal mortality rates at the COCH in 2015-16 as being high but not indicative of being an outlier. He observed that, quote, but actually Countess of Chester's crude neonatal mortality rate in 2015 was 2.96 per 1,000. There were about 3,000 deaths, 3,000 births, so that means there is about there was 9 deaths they had counted in their definition in its tier, and it was the highest in its tier of centres with 2,000 to 4,000 deaths a year. I have to say only just Blackpool had 8 deaths compared with the Countess of Chester's 9. So again, it was high, it was in the tails one would not call an outlier. Second, hindsight bias and exceptionality throughout the inquiry. There have been repeated references made to the Beverley Alec case, the suggestion being that, as a fact, there is always a possibility that a health professional might be causing deliberate harm or even murdering patients, and therefore this is something that ought to be in the minds of nurses, clinicians, managers, senior managers and board members if there is an unexpected or unexplained patient outcome. When asked about the Beverley Alec case, Dr. Breary put it succinctly: I think we all would have been aware of it historically, but there's one thing to be aware of. It's one thing to be aware of it historically, and another thinking to be considering that it might be happening on your unit. The reality is that cases such as Beverly Allitt are extremely rare. In virtually all incidents, there is an unexpected or initially unexplained patient outcome. The root cause will lie in the state of care and treatment. The inherent improbability of deliberate harm no doubt explains why there is no published guidance for senior managers or healthcare professionals in what to do in a Beverly Allitt situation. The authors of any such guidance would of course have to have regard to what happened at the Stepping Hill Hospital, Stockport in 2011-12, referred to by a number of witnesses in the course of their oral evidence. Police commenced a criminal investigation into 2 adult patient deaths and the poisoning of 19 others. In the course of the investigation, a nurse, Rebecca Layton, was wrongfully accused of the crimes and arrested. She spent 6 weeks in prison and was later released. Professor Mary Dixon Woods observed in her evidence that I think our procedures for dealing with these kinds of very transgressive, unusual incidents have remained underdeveloped in the NHS, and we know from other areas like fraud or sexual abuse, unless you've got the procedures in place, it's very difficult for organisations to deal with them. I think there is an absence of clarity about what you do in confronted with an unexpected series of highly transgressive events, particularly in those caring for children. Finally, what might appear more obvious over 9 years after the final death, after a 3.5-year police investigation, a 10-month criminal trial and a retrial, and the inquiry's own 18-month investigation, was simply not obvious at the time, nor could it have been. Hindsight bias may well have unfairly founded much of the criticism of those who were operating in the real-world context of the Countess of Chester at the time. Contemporaneous evidence of growing concerns. On the timing of disclosure to them of concerns in relation to Letby's actions, the senior managers have been consistent throughout their evidence to the inquiry. The first time concerns of deliberate harm being caused to the babies on the NNU were articulated followed the death of child P at the end of June 2016. Prior to that point, it had never been articulated to any member of the senior management team that there was a suspicion of concern that a member of staff was deliberately harming babies. If, having heard the evidence, the inquiry finds that a clinician or clinicians harboured real concerns that Letby was deliberately harming babies prior to the death of child P on the 24th of June 2016, fundamental questions for it to resolve will be why it was these individuals did not clearly and unambiguously report these concerns either to the police or anyone else. Why did they not act on their concerns, given their professional duties and code of conduct? Whilst relations between senior management and some clinicians became strained in the latter part of 2016 and 17, there had previously been no history of difficulty. Indeed, in 2016, the CQC produced a favourable inspection report, rating the trust as good, and had commended the leadership and management of the COCH, finding that the hospital was led and managed by an accessible and visible exec team. The team were well known to staff, visited most wards and departments regularly, responded to issues that staff raised, and that there was clear leadership and communication in services at a local level. Senior managers were visible, approachable, and staff were were supported in the workplace. Staff achievements were recognised both informally and through staff recognition awards. It is not a sustainable position to suggest that at any time prior to the end of June 2016, at which point there was an articulation of concerns in relation to deliberate harm by Letby, that any clinician was fearful for their position of livelihood. It remains unclear from the evidence when such concerns became crystallised. When Dr. Brewery was asked about this during his evidence, he was simply not able to identify a point at which he was of the mind that Letby was harming babies. Quote, "Well, obviously, I was aware of her association from the first three, and it was more of a growing, nagging concern than any one seminal moment." Quote, Dr. Brewery's conduct suggests that, in reality, for him, it was after the death of child P on 24th of June 2016. As regards Dr. Jayaram, the picture is far less clear. On his own evidence, which had strengthened considerably by the time he stepped into the witness box at Manchester Crown Court for the child K retrial, he concluded, as he saw Letby standing over child K's cot on 17th of February 2016, that Letby had deliberately dislodged the baby's feeding tube and disabled the alarm. Despite describing a scene during which he caught Letby in the act of a murder, he neither acted on this astonishing event at the time, nor mentioned it to anyone, nor reported it to anyone, but rather waited over 12 months, until March 2017, before communicating anything to senior managers about what he claimed to have witnessed. The inquiry will have to resolve the issue of why it was that Dr. Jayaram did not act on what he says that he saw. The evidence received by the inquiry is that prior to the death of child P, the deaths and collapses were being treated by all clinicians, nurses, staff and those senior managers who were made aware of the increase in mortality on the NNU as matters which were explicable by a combination of issues around care, treatment and the sickness of babies. That is evident both from contemporaneous records including emails, minutes of meetings and reviews, and by what was done by the individuals involved and of course what was not done by them. The inquiry ought to be guided so far as possible by such contemporaneous material rather than the scattered recollections contained in the witness statements of those whose Rule 9 responses were received by the inquiry up to 10 years after the relevant period. There is an overwhelming likelihood that, to a greater or lesser extent, these recollections have been tainted by the convictions of Letby. The wisdom of undertaking such a careful consideration of historical recollections is underlined by the number of witnesses whose evidence has included the qualifying statement, quote, "If I had known then what I know now," unquote, on the topic Letby's convictions. Equally, the inquiry ought to guard against ignoring the apparent reluctance of certain witnesses to give evidence which may be viewed as supporting Letby in an inquiry whose starting point was her guilt, and in relation to which, on more than one occasion, the chair made it clear that her role did not allow her, or indeed anyone, to question the convictions. In addition to which, and despite being pressed by certain parties to postpone the start of the public hearings, the chair dismissed any concerns about the safety of Letby's convictions as noise. And others, including counsel for the families, insisted that anyone raising such concerns ought to be ashamed of themselves. If this inquiry is a search for the truth, then it is unthinkable that, in the face of powerful evidence that the juries in the Crown Court proceedings have been presented with misleading and incomplete evidence, it should continue to produce a report based on the bedrock of such convictions. Whilst the awaited decision of the CCRC cannot be predicted, the increasing concern expressed by world-class experts that the prosecution case was based on medical misunderstandings and poor expert evidence are in real danger of dissolving this bedrock into a beach of shifting sands. This is poetry in motion. Chronology of baby deaths and action taken. Between 8th of June and 22nd of June 2015, there are a cluster of deaths on the NNU. Child A on 8th of June, Child C, yada yada. As a serious incident panel was convened to discuss the deaths of Child A, C and D. Nothing is recorded in respect of this meeting relating to any concerns about the deaths being unnatural. Those who are recorded as being in attendance are Ms Kelly, Dr Breary, Julie Fogarty, Sean Williams, Debbie Peacock and Ruth Millward. No concerns were raised or expressed about the possibility of deliberate harm by any member of staff. Only one attendee, Dr Breary, has subsequently recalled that there was a reference to Letby of her being present in relation to the deaths of Child A, C and D on this. In his Rule 9 statement, he states that he was not, quote, overly concerned about it at the time. In his oral evidence to the inquiry, Dr Breary stated that, quote, I was aware that sometimes you do get clusters in medicine, in neonatology, where your deaths for a year won't be spread out evenly. You know there will be times when you have more than others, and I thought that wasn't within the realms of, it didn't strike me as, obviously it's something to concern and consider the factors we concerned, but once you have done the things that we were doing, there was nothing too concerning at that stage for me, end quote. At the conclusion of the serious incident panel, it was agreed by all that no further investigation was required, nor any additional action needed to be taken. Following the meeting on 2nd of July 2015, Ms Kelly sent Dr Breary an email inviting Dr Breary to contact her with anything further that he wanted to discuss. Dr Breary confirmed in evidence that he did not contact her. Approximately 1 month later, Child E died on the 4th of August and Child F collapsed on the 5th of August. There was a further collapse, Child H, on the 26th of September. No concerns about deliberate harm being the cause of death of Child E or the other collapses were reported by any clinician to the senior managers. Indeed, there are other deaths in September which did not appear on the indictment in relation to Letby, about which Dr Breary was aware, but about which he had no concerns, notwithstanding the numbers and the relative increase in mortality. On the 23rd of October, Child I died. Again, as with the other babies, no concerns in respect of deliberate harm were articulated at the time. Indeed, Dr Breary produced a mortality review for Child I on the 31st of October 2015, cognizant of the deaths of Child A, C, D and E, which summarises the cause of Child I's death as follows, quote, Child I was a 27-week preterm baby who was likely to have died from abdominal pathology, probably NEC or its complications. However, I believe post-mortem examination has been requested and might give further information. She was transferred a number of times between hospitals and had a number of different specialists involved in her care. It is hard to judge whether the number of transferred affected the sad outcome. However, I don't think transferring a preterm baby 5 times between 3 hospitals and planning further transfers if she had survived is sensible or in the baby's best interests. There was also an apparent delay in decisions to transfer, which seemed to the 3-way communication process between referring centre, surgical centre and tertiary neonatal centres. I will bring both these points to the mortality review with the Cheshire and Merseyside neonatal network, also to be discussed at PMM, close quote. There is nothing contained within the review, either in its body or summary conclusion, to suggest or even hint at a possibility of a malicious act by a member of staff. As CTI suggested in her questioning of Dr. Brewery, the review goes beyond a differential diagnosis. It asserts a likely cause. It does not indicate any doubt, nor does it identify any need for a further reflection or review as to the cause of the death. If the inquiry finds that at the time of writing this review, Dr. Brewery had real concerns that the cause of child I's death may have been as a result of deliberate harm by Letby, which he appeared to suggest in his oral evidence, then the inquiry must resolve the question of why he failed to refer to this in his review. Why, as the neonatal lead, he failed to clearly articulate such concerns and moreover escalate them. Between the death of child I and the Thematic review meeting held on the 8th of January 2016, there were no further deaths. However, there was a collapse of child J, although not a child in respect of whom Letby was found guilty of attempting to harm. Dr. Brewery made clear in his evidence that he had no concerns about child J, stating that child J was a baby with known abdominal surgery and stomas, and I think the deterioration overnight with Dr. Gibbs had been put down to a seizure. He has the epilepsy consultant expert at the trust. He was the epilepsy consultant expert at the trust at the time. You can have electrolyte disturbances with babies who have stomas, and at the time I didn't see it as overly concerning in terms of, again, the categorisation of what represents normal care and expected deteriorations, or unexpected deteriorations, if you like, close quote. The fact that the Thematic review was convened involving Dr. Brewery, Dr. V, Dr. Subhadar, Arian Powell, Anne Murphy, Laura Eagles and Debbie Peacock is entirely inconsistent with the suggestion that any clinician involved at this stage held the belief that a member of staff was deliberately harming babies. Rather, it suggests that the cause of the rise in mortality was believed to be clinical in nature. Whilst the recollections of those who attend the meeting differ, they are entirely consistent about the fact that at no stage was it suggested or discussed that these deaths could be a result of deliberate acts perpetrated by a member of staff. Dr. Subhadar's role as an external independent participant and specialist is instructive. Having been brought in as an experienced consultant in neonatology from a different hospital to review the cases, Liverpool Women's Hospital, he did not identify anything untoward about the cases reviewed. He described the meeting as constructive. He could not recall staffing or a concern about a particular member of staff being discussed. If that was a belief held by any participant in the meeting, there can be no justification for not clearly and unambiguously communicating this to Dr. Subhadar, either formally in the meeting or informally outside of the meeting. If such a concern had been raised, he would have recalled this. In response to questioning by CTI, Dr. Subhadar stated that if Dr. Brewery had been concerned that a member of staff was harming babies, he would have expected him to raise a safeguarding issue at local level. Indeed, at the conclusion of the meeting, further steps were agreed which were directed at a clinical or care management course, namely to do another review of the 12-hour period prior to death collapse. There was no suggestion or action in relation to exploring the events being reviewed and the action of any staff member. Whilst it has been asserted by Dr. Brewery that he sought an urgent meeting with Mr. Harvey on the 15th of February 2016 following the Thematic review meeting, there is no documentary evidence to support this, nor does Mr. Harvey recall this. nor would this be in any way consistent with the tenor of subsequent emails from Dr. Brewery of which the inquiry is in possession, nor did Dr. Brewery make any attempts to speak to Mr. Harvey in person, or indeed any other member of the senior management team following the meeting. On the 17th of March 2016, Arian Powell emailed Ms. Kelly in relation to the thematic review. Ms. Powell copied the email to Dr. Brewery, Dr. J. Aram, Yvonne Farmer, Yvonne Griffith and Mary Crocombe. She states the following in her email, quote, "Hi Alison, I was hoping that we could arrange a meeting with you to discuss how to move forward with regards to our finding. 1. High mortality, 8 as opposed to our normal 2 to 3 per year. 2. A commonality was that a particular nurse was on duty either leading up to or during this particular a commonality was that a particular nurse was on duty either leading up to or during. This particular nurse commenced work on the unit in January 2012 without incident. 3. A doctor was also identified as a common theme, however not as many as the nurse." Ms. Powell concludes her short email as follows, quote, "Despite reviewing these cases, there was nothing obvious that we were able to identify. Therefore, your input would be valued," close quote. The evidence of Mr. Harvey and Ms. Kelly was that nothing within this email conveyed to them a sense of urgency. There is nothing within this email that expresses a concern that a member of staff is deliberately harming babies on the NNU. Absent that concern being expressed, as would have reasonably been expected, and absent the lens of hindsight bias, this email can and indeed was reasonably read as suggesting there was likely to be an as yet unidentified clinical care issue. All those copied into the email had opportunity to either write an additional email or clarify the concern. If that was a concern or belief held by any of the individuals copied into the email, there is no reasonable explanation for failing to communicate further by email, by telephone, or by personal approach. This is particularly striking in light of the evidence given by Dr. J. Oram or having witnessed Letby attack child K on the 17th of February 2016, 9 days after the review meeting. The absence of this urgency is something that evidently influenced and informed the decision making of Ms. Kelly and Mr. Harvey. The thematic review was sent by Ms. Powell to Ms. Kelly on the 21st of March 2016. Some 3 weeks passed between the receipt of the report and a follow-up email from Ms. Powell on the 14th of April 2016, asking for Ms. Kelly's thoughts. It is notable that there were no emails sent by Dr. Brewery or Dr. J. Aram, i.e. those who have suggested that, by this time, they entertained concerns about Letby deliberately harming babies. Nor did anyone go to Ms. Kelly's office or any other senior manager's office or contact them in any way. This behaviour is not consistent with a belief that there was a murderer on the ward. This is important contextual information which Ms. Kelly and Mr. Harvey took into consideration when making their decisions. Nowhere in the thematic review is there a suggestion of a possibility of deliberate harm as an explanation for the increase in mortality rates. Absent such an assertion, the only reasonable interpretation of its contents is that the causes or factors being considered are care-related, not criminal. The review, which had the input of the neonatal lead, Dr. Brewery, Dr. V, Dr. Sabadar, Arian Powell, Anne Murphy, Laura Eagles and Debbie Peacock, indicated a natural cause of death in respect of all the babies, save for child A, with one baby awaiting a post-mortem, probable prematurity and sepsis, and another baby awaiting a post-mortem, and in that context concludes as follows, quote, There was no common theme identified in all these cases. One baby had severe HIE, and the Trust's rate of HIE in 2015 was low and similar to previous years. One baby had severe multiple congenital abnormalities with a very poor prognosis. One baby had a significant congenital heart disease and probable sepsis. 2 babies, possibly 3 pending post-mortem results, died of sepsis despite timely antibiotic treatment. 2 babies, possibly 3 depending on post-mortem result. The cause of death is uncertain despite having post-mortems. End quote. It goes on to identify themes, not causes, which connected some of the deaths, namely 1. Sudden deterioration in relation to some of the babies, 2. Timing of arrests, 6 of the 9 arrests between midnight and 4 a.m, 3. Delayed cord clamping in respect of 3 babies and 1 case of mild hypothermia, 4. Use of ranitidine in relation to 2 babies, and 5. 3 babies had care issues around UVCs. Quote, 1 was used when too low, 1 was used when too high, and 1 was displaced and came out. Close quote. However, the absence of a clearly articulated concern that a member of staff is harming babies in combination with the actions identified, along with the areas to improve practice, had the inevitable effect of focusing minds on issues of care, which, in almost all cases, would be the explanation. There was also nothing contained within the report to mitigate the risks of Dr. Brewery. There was also nothing contained within the report to mitigate the risk Dr. Brewery suggests he had apprehended at this time, such as, for example, additional training or supervision of Letby, or even removing her from a patient-facing role within the hospital. It is also noteworthy that the first draft of the minutes of the thematic review prepared by Dr. Brewery made no mention of the first theme, 1. Sudden deterioration. Some of the babies suddenly and unexpectedly deteriorated, and there was no cause for the deterioration/death identified at post-mortem. End quote. The versions circulated by Dr. Brewery to Arian Powell, Debbie Peacock, Dr. V, Dr. Subadar, Ian Murphy, and copied into Dr. J.R. Gillian Morton, Emma Punter Jane by email on 8th of February 2016, did not contain any reference to babies suddenly or unexpectedly collapsing. This additional theme was suggested by Dr. Subadar in his email on 10th of February 2016. Quote, 1 additional comment that you might consider adding somewhere that relates to the theme of some of the cases involving babies that suddenly and unexpectedly deteriorated and in whom there was no clear cause for deterioration/death identified at post-mortem. End quote. The original version of the thematic review without this theme is understood to have been sent to Mr. Harvey and Dr. Brewery on the 15th of February 2016, who then forwarded it to Ms. Kelly. The very fact that Dr. Subadar had to prompt this change to the thematic review minutes suggests that Dr. Brewery did not at that point in time believe that this was of great significance, and certainly indicates that his mind was not focused on deliberate harm as a potential explanation for the deaths and collapses. On the 4th of May 2016, Dr. Brewery sent an email in response to the rescheduling of a meeting with Ms. Kelly, Mr. Harvey and Arian Powell to discuss the thematic review. Again, nothing in Dr. Brewery's email suggests a belief on his part that Letby was murdering or deliberately harming babies. This would be completely inconsistent with the statement, quote, Arian has sensibly put her on day shifts, end quote, without any suggestion of requiring supervision or some other mitigation, or indeed being removed from the ward. Accordingly, it was reasonable for Ms. Kelly to form an impression that this email related to support for Letby and concerns around her welfare. Indeed, Dr. Brewery's email suggests that he anticipated Letby's return to the night shift at some point. Quote, "It would be very helpful to meet before she is due to go back on night shifts. There is some pressure regarding staffing numbers with this at the moment." End quote. There is nothing to suggest that at this point in time Dr. Brewery had in his mind that Letby was murdering and deliberately harming babies. A meeting to discuss the thematic review was held on the 11th of May 2016, and attendants were Ms. Kelly, Mr. Harvey, Steve Brewery, Anne Murphy, Arian Powell. At no stage during the course of the meeting did Dr. Brewery or anyone else state that he was concerned that Letby was deliberately harming babies, as evidenced by the contemporaneous note of the meeting. There were a number of possible factors discussed to explain the increase in mortality. If Dr. Brewery held a suspicion that Letby was murdering babies on the NNU at this point in time, why didn't he articulate this in the very clearest of terms? Arian Powell and Anne Murphy, speaking with emotion, could not, on any view, justify Dr. Brewery's failure to clearly express his concerns about deliberate harm, particularly so given his position as the clinical lead for the neonatal unit. Both Ms. Kelly and Mr. Harvey have been clear that there was no suggestion of deliberate harm during his meeting, and that the issues being highlighted were related to care and possible competency issues in respect of a nurse and a doctor, albeit there was reassurance given by Arian Powell that there were no performance issues regarding Letby. Additionally, reassurance was provided by the fact that the thematic review had involved careful consideration and scrutiny of each case, a natural cause of death provided in respect of all but one baby, and the clinical actions and areas of improvement identified within the report. And in an email from Dr. Burry on 16th of May 2016 to other NNU consultants and doctors, including Dr. Jayaram, Dr. Gibbs, Dr. Murphy, Dr. Holt, the meeting was characterised by him as having been helpful. He noted that Mr. Harvey and Ms. Kelly were, quote, "grateful for the work we have done in the various reviews and involving an external clinician," end quote. The inquiry has not disclosed any emails from any of the recipients of this email, including from Dr. Jayaram, taking issue with its contents or querying the absence of action being taken in respect of Letby. So to suggest that there was a fear of corresponding amongst themselves at this stage is wholly without merit and not supported by later email correspondence between clinicians. It was reasonable for the senior managers to expect that the lead consultant for the NNU would clearly articulate if he had concerns about a member of staff deliberately harming babies, or indeed to have called the police himself. On the last day of the evidential hearings, Dr. Susan Gilby gave evidence about conversations she had with Dr. Brewery after she had joined the Trust. She articulated a crucial question for this inquiry to resolve. Quote, "I did have in my mind questions about why were the consultants not able to just go to the police themselves. Our A&E consultants, for example, would call the police all the time and they don't ask the exec team if that's okay. But later I learnt that the interactions had been so threatening that they were fearful," end quote. Between the meeting on the 11th of May 2016 and the death of child P at the end of June 2016, there was no further contact from Dr. Brewery or any other clinicians with any member of senior management team. There was no evidence that Dr. Brewery acted in any way to suggest that he had active concerns about Letby posing a risk to the babies on the NNU during this period. His conduct is simply not consistent with this interpretation. In his email to Ms. Kelly on the 28th of June 2016, following the death of child P, he states that, quote, "There's been a watchful, waiting approach since our last meeting with Ian and Alison in March. However, since the episodes and deaths last week, there was a consensus at the senior paediatricians meeting We felt on the basis of ensuring patient safety on NNU, this member of staff should not have any further patient contact." End quote. This can only be read as confirming that the concerns about Letby crystallised following the deaths of child O and P, that is the end of June 2016. That, notwithstanding, with the same email, Dr. Brewery identified other actions which ought to be undertaken to make the NNU safe, thereby suggesting that there may be other potential issues at play within the NNU. Quote, "Other measures I think would be helpful would include a deep clean and reducing the number of allocated cots on the NNU, at least temporarily. 2 ICU cots and 3 HDU cots, rather than 3 and 4, would improve nurse staffing ratios and reduce the risk of nosocomial infection by making the space around the cots closer to BAPM standards." End quote. Whilst there was an apparent link between Letby's shift pattern and a number of deaths, that was balanced by the fact that she worked more shifts than others, and due to her skills and training, she was more likely to be looking after the sickest infants on the NNU. Added into the balance was the fact that nothing was ever identified to actually connect her with the deaths. The clinicians had not witnessed Letby doing anything untoward in relation to a baby, or at least not escalated to any senior manager that they had witnessed such an incident. Nothing was identified or raised in respect of any concerning insulin test results or rashes/skin discoloration. These undefined concerns about Letby were not shared by nursing staff, in particular the NNU manager, Arian Powell, who was firmly of the view that Letby was a good and competent nurse. In addition, natural causes of death were ascribed to almost all of the babies, save for child A, whose cause of death was unascertained, with a further 2 babies awaiting post-mortem. On the other hand, there appeared to be real issues as identified in the thematic review. The collective view of the senior managers was that a better understanding of what was going on was required. Given how extremely rare acts of deliberate harm by healthcare professionals are, it was entirely reasonable to approach the undefined concerns raised by the clinicians with an open mind and have regard to all possible explanations, likely and unlikely. The senior managers had a responsibility to understand what was going on so that they could be in a position to clearly articulate this to the police, should there be a need to make a referral. Because of the many factors set out above and the absence of any clear causal connection between the deaths and Letby, it felt by the senior managers that further investigation had to be undertaken. As Ms. Kelly put it, quote, "I think at the time we felt that we needed to get much more information internally so that we knew how we would articulate these concerns to the police. You know, on reflection, maybe we could have gone to the police then, but it didn't feel the right thing to do at the time because we felt we needed more information so that we could articulate clearly to the police what the problem was, and at the time we weren't clear. It was complex. We needed to pull things together to see what the fuller picture was at the time." End quote. The views of others. The senior manager's understanding of the evidence provided by the following clinicians to the inquiry is that they were not aware of suspicions of deliberate harm until the end of June 2016. Dr. Salidi, Dr. Barrett, Dr. Neem, Dr. V, Dr. ZA, Dr. Maybury, Dr. Ventress and Dr. McCormack. Furthermore, the inquiry sent out a series of questionnaires to nurses who worked on the NNU over the relevant period. Some of these nurses also provided witness statements to the inquiry. Having received Rule 9 requests to do so, this evidence was summarised by CTI and read into the inquiry record on the 15th of October 2024. This summary included the following statement, quote, "Most of the nurses commented positively about the quality of management, supervision and or support that they received from Arian Powell and Yvonne Griffiths. Most nurses describe being aware of or worried about the increase in the numbers of deaths on the NNU. End quote. What this summary failed to explain was that a significant number of the nurses considered the increase in mortality to be due to natural causes. Furthermore, CTI chose not to include the fact that a significant number of nurses had told the inquiry that they had no concerns regarding Letby. Lisa Walker, Nurse said, Amy Davies, Jennifer Jones, Key, Bernadette Butterworth, Caroline Oakley, Chris Booth, Mary Griffiths, Joanne Williams, Nurse Y, Belinda Williamson. Reputation. It has been suggested that the senior managers were more concerned with protecting their own reputations than ensuring the safety of babies. The inquiry has received no evidence which supports this assertion. The suggestion that the senior managers were reluctant to act on concerns about Letby appears to have been prompted by an entry made on the risk register by Karen Townsend on the 11th of July 2016, which read, quote, potential damage to reputation of neonatal service and wider trust due to the apparent increased mortality within the neonatal unit, end quote. Both Mr Chambers and Mr Harvey gave evidence that they could not specifically recall the entry on the risk register, but insofar as reputation was concerned, their only concern was maintaining public confidence that the NNU was safe at the time. The senior managers have emphatically refuted the proposition that either their own reputation or that to the trust was prioritised over safety. Internal and external reviews. After meeting with paediatric consultants to better understanding the concerns about the rise in neonatal deaths and collapses at the end of June 2016, a decision was taken to downgrade the NNU to a level 1 unit and undertake some internal investigations. The motivation of the senior managers has always been the safety of the babies on the NNU. If the senior managers had not kept an open mind and had instead accepted without question the allegations made by the consultants that Letby was deliberately harming babies, then there would have been no downgrading of the NNU, no internal or external investigations, and this would have increased the risks of more babies collapsing and or dying and hampered the search for the truth about what had happened. Even when downgrading took effect, there needed to be a micromanagement of the NNU by the leadership team to ensure adequate care of patients and that the right decisions around treatment were being made. It became clear that there had been a culture of coping which had developed on the NNU, with care being given to some babies who ought to have been transferred to other hospitals for more specialised care. The inquiry will want to consider whether the desire for the NNU to remain as a level 2 unit with the status that this generated overawed the ability of the clinical leads to identify shortcomings in the care being provided. It is notable that for the past 9 years the NNU has remained classified as a level 1 unit, this being despite the efforts of the clinical leads to have it reassessed and reinstated as a level 2. It is understandable if the clinicians viewed the downgrade as an implicit criticism of their skills, and this may have had a bearing on the reluctance to report collapses and send a clear message up the chain that the unit was struggling. Furthermore, the inquiry will want to consider if there should be stronger networks of oversight from clinicians in other hospitals to ensure the objectivity of reviews and reduce the prospect of such myopia occurring in the future. The tendency for clinicians to mark their own homework ought to be avoided wherever possible. Following the downgrading, tasks were assigned to various individuals within the Trust, and information was compiled as part of an operation known as Silver Command. The work was multifactorial, but included the preparation of a communications plan, a review of the NNU in terms of activity levels and the nature of the admissions, a clinical review of the babies who had collapsed and been transferred out of the COCH. The collation of data from staff rotas and staffing review was also carried out. Whilst there were no formal terms of reference for this work, it was considered a reasonable step by the senior managers to collate information about the deaths and collapses with the support of Dr. Gibbs, Anne Martin, Ruth Millward, Sean Williams and others. As a result of the internal review work, a position paper was prepared by Ruth Millward. Ms. Kelly and Mr. Harvey were the co-authors. This identified a number of issues in terms of how risk was being managed by the NNU, including the fact that sudden deteriorations were not being reported via DATEX. The inquiry has heard evidence in relation to the limited incident reporting practices on the NNU and the concern among risk and patient safety staff around the scope of incident reporting and the lack of responsiveness of some paediatric consultants to improve these practices. The position paper also identified 11 incidents which were reported between June 2015 and March 2016 regarding staffing levels and acuity concerns. The paper noticed an increase in acuity and activity on the NNU during this period in question. Mr. Harvey dealt with the conclusion of the position paper in a statement, quote, "Overall, the conclusions of the report indicated that there had been an increase in workload intensity and acuity on the NNU, and that those factors may partly have explained the increase in mortality. It was not a satisfactory explanation for the increase in the sense that it was clear those factors were not the whole answer, but were potentially contributing factors." End quote. As the inquiry is aware, the RCPCH was commissioned by Mr. Harvey to conduct a service review in light of the increase in unexpected incidents on the neonatal unit. The terms of reference requested that the RCPCH consider whether there were any identifiable common factors or failings that might in part or in whole explain the apparent increase in mortality. End quote. The senior managers respectfully maintain that the commissioning of an independent review was a sensible course of action at that stage. In the absence of any evidence, it could not be assumed that Letby and not any other factor or combination of factors was the cause of the increase in mortality. To have accepted the consultant's concerns without exploring all potential issues on the NNU would have been irresponsible and would have risked patient safety. That is an important point, and I will pause there, and I am going to continue the rest because this document is fantastic.